Hello, welcome to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm your host, your new host, Ken Rutsky, working with our host, Steve McDonald. And I'm excited today to welcome a great guest, in fact, a repeat guest, Jonathan Symonds. Jonathan's the Chief Marketing Officer at Radiant. And as he told me, he's a 20-year startup marketing builder. Prior to Radiant, Jonathan was at Ori and then previously Min.io. And he is a guy, in his own words, who likes to have his hands on the keyboard. So, Jonathan, welcome back to the podcast. And why don't you tell us a little more about yourself?
Thanks, Ken. I'm delighted to be back. I loved my conversation with Steve and love following the podcast and have done so over the years. So my background, as you mentioned, I am a startup junkie. I've done the CMO roles for a number of different companies over the years. Ori prior to its merger with Radiant, Min.io, the object storage pioneer prior to that, and a number of companies going back in the AI space and in the software space. I really love this stage. I love building, as you mentioned, and it's exciting. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
One of the things that I wanted to ask about is you're a small company guy, right? Startup. I'm here at the early phase. And as you said, Radiant's brand new, but behind Radiant is this massive investment fund called Brookfield. So maybe you can explain that, and then we can talk about what it's like to work at a little startup with a big backer like that.
Yeah, certainly. Radiant is a vehicle that came out of the Brookfield AI Infrastructure Fund, which they announced back in November of last year, and they're looking to put about $100 billion to work in the AI infrastructure space. And what Ori brought to the table was kind of the software and expertise to really allow that to run. And so we merged that. The company's about a month old. It's super exciting. This is a space that to date has been characterized primarily by VC funding and VC expectations on return. But as AI infrastructure, as we've seen it, and we've seen the depth and the scale of the numbers required to run these kind of businesses, it looks much more like an infrastructure play. And so when you bring long duration capital to the table, coupled with expertise, you can do things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do and look at timelines that you wouldn't otherwise be able to look at if you were literally just at a startup.
And I guess that's because a typical venture fund will have a 10-year life at the maximum, right? And so when you're talking about these multi-billion dollar projects, 10 years is important. It's not a short amount of time, but it's not the full time frame when, say, you're talking to a sovereign nation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what they want in return is they want to see companies that have either proven themselves in this space and they think will be around for a long time, or have been around for a long time doing these types of things. And so that trust is an important element that comes to the table. But yes, those funds with a 10-year cycle, a 3 to 5 to, maybe a little longer expectation of a return is a different financing mechanism than it is infrastructure investing, which is looking for utility type returns, but also delivering a utility like experience, one that's ubiquitous, that's always on, that's efficient in terms of cost, and also inexpensive in terms of consumption. So there's a variety of things that play into it that sort of mark this is the time that infrastructure investors should be getting into this space. And it's not surprising that Brookfield is the first on the scene.
And then I guess Radiant then packages that value prop of the Ori technology, the patient capital, the land, the power. Maybe you can talk about how you put that together as a value prop, and what has prepared you to do that as a marketer, and this pretty unique opportunity here.
Yeah, so we talk about it in terms of the 4 pillars, right? You need capital, you need powered land, you need compute, and you need software. And those 4 pillars are effectively a product because it allows you to go from the capital stack to the software stack, from the shovel to the model, to finance these things, to build them, to stand them up, to burn them in, and to operate them on behalf of your hyperscaler partner or your sovereign nation partner. And so that really, from a product marketing perspective, is a message that resonates very clearly with this audience. And this is not the standard audience that you would think of in the neocloud space, which is often defined by sort of the t-shirt crowd. This is very much the suit crowd. And so you need to speak to them in those terms of certainty and duration that they understand, because these are big decisions. These are very, very large, long-term capital decisions. And we're in the business of defining certainty and selling certainty and confidence that they have the right partner to deliver on these types of infrastructure projects.
Yeah, it's interesting. You said a couple things that I want to touch on, and I want to come back to trust and confidence because I think those are very related. But when you think about the suit crowd versus the t-shirt crowd, and you're going, as you said, I love it, by the way, from shovel to model, it seems like the buying group is going to be really diverse because even if the suit is making the decision, the t-shirt guy is going to care about the model. And I'm wondering how you think about messaging and go to market in that complex buying group kind of structure.
Yeah, and it's a great question, and it's one that we feel fortunate to have kind of the right tooling for. So at the one end, you have Ori's existing AI cloud, and that's what we call that t-shirt crowd, that t-shirt audience. That is our proof point. It's our proving ground. It's our sandbox where we integrate the latest and greatest GPUs, and we do so on behalf of our customers. Is where we implement the latest and greatest models. Many of those are open source models, including the Nemotron model that just came out from NVIDIA. So you want to build a great experience that people can touch and feel to give them the confidence that they need. But then again, on the other side, you need to be able to bring that expertise. And that expertise really comes in the form of people that explain to you, because every one of these infrastructure projects is slightly different, that can explain to you what you're trying to achieve and how you can deliver against that. And so those two things together create a story, as you will, around how you build these projects.
Yeah, and how do you tell that story to those different audiences?
So I think one of the areas that you see from time to time on LinkedIn is that, product marketing, it's a little passe. I don't buy that narrative. I think product marketing is as important as ever, and particularly in the space that we operate in. Attention is stressed. Like if you've just been looking at any piece of news over the last 6 months, you'll see that attention is scattered across a variety of different domains, whether it's global news cycle, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's just the AI space, which is moving so incredibly quickly, that you need to be able to put the right message in front of the right audience to connect with them at the right time on a constant basis. And, that's a very challenging task to do all three of those things. It's hard to do one of those things well in a startup. It's very hard to do all three of those things. And so that's really a challenge that anybody who operates in this space, who's sitting in the CMO seat, is going to have to do. And that's one of the things that we are hyper focused on today, because you got to get the product messages right, and you got to make sure that they're getting to the right people, and you got to make sure that you're getting them at the right time, and you're doing so with cadence.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, a lot of new tools out there. Are you thinking about your stack differently to do that with some of the new AI capabilities out there, and well as the new platforms around ABM?
Yeah, it's an incredibly exciting time from a marketing perspective. It's also incredibly daunting because there are so many tools. Every day that I wake up and look at my inbox, it seems like 5 other people have found me and want to sell me something that's going to get me more meetings or get me more coverage inside of an LLM. But I do think that at the end of the day, the tooling is remarkable. And it's, again, that part of the business is accelerating as well in terms of what its capabilities are. I spend more time exhausting my tokens on, Claude and ChatGPT, ClaudeX, and their Codex product. I'm usually done with those by late in the morning, 11 or 12. And then I got to wait a few hours to get back into them. But you can do a tremendous amount yourself from a hand tooling perspective, but it's really about taking the compounding effect. So looking at the tooling that you have and connecting those to each other with triggers, with automation that allow you to do so much more than you would be able to do with small team sizes. And then you couple that with the resources to kind of broaden that tool set. And you have really an incredible experimentation framework. And I think that is one of these things that is also underrated. A great experimenter in this business is the best asset you can have because it allows you to learn more quickly. And that's what you have to do because, again, you don't know exactly what's going to connect with who at the right time. But if you run enough experiments, you're going to be able to start to find the signal out of that noise. And those are the aha moments that make this job so fun.
That's awesome. Talk about the right content to the right people at the right time. I want to circle back now to trust and confidence because, as you said, there's so much noise. So, how do you create trust in that communication channel? Like, what do you see as the keys there?
So there's two ways to think about this, right? I referenced it briefly before. Like, there's trust in proof points, and proof points in our business are large scale deployments of AI infrastructure. And there's some companies that have done a really good job of proving to the world that, they can do what they do. There's also a totally different set of gatekeepers in this world, right? The gatekeeper in the world that we operate in is semi-analysis. It is not the traditional analyst firms. The folks in the team at semi-analysis have sort of built the alpha and the omega of the AI infrastructure space from GPUs to inference and so forth. And so you have to make sure that you are on the right side of that analyst pool as well. And then the other part of it is that you can bring trust with you. So one of the things that Radiant benefits disproportionately from is that we inherit a lot of the trust that Brookfield has built over the last 100+ years in doing this effectively, in being a trusted partner, and the trust that comes with that. Because again, when you're talking about $1 billion+ decisions, you are looking for certainty. You're looking for decision support.
And I'd imagine some of your early customers might be maybe people who have already experienced Brookfield and have that trust kind of built into their experience.
Very much so. The Rolodex of the team there and their ability to assist is pretty remarkable. But again, the reason that people on the other side of the phone pick up that phone is because of the track record that exists. And so you combine that with the reputation that Ori had already in the marketplace, and you're really in a good place.
Now, when you think about trust and confidence, one of the things we've heard repeatedly on this podcast from your peers, right, is it's hard when I'm saying it. But if my customer is saying it or one of my customers is saying it, it's received in a much different way. Are you finding that to be the case in this big infrastructure market that you operate in?
Very much so, but I think there's a distinction that's emerging in this space that's probably true for a lot of different spaces, but in particularly in this space, is that it's one thing to make announcements, right? And you see a lot of those announcements, but very often those announcements don't actually pan out into built infrastructure. And so finding those stories that are announced and then completed, and then with a happy customer on the other side of that, that is the gold standard for credibility and customer testimonials and customer marketing. Just the pure announcement piece of it, it's just more noise. And so that's what I think a lot of buyers in this space struggle with. They'll see a big flashy number in a press release, but you get down 9 months later and they find that project hasn't even begun yet. And that actually is a very quick destroyer of that trust that you're trying to build. So it's interesting that you have to be able to deliver against all of that, from, again, shovel all the way to model. And that takes time, right? Because as you're building a brand, these projects take time. Some of them take 12, 24, 36 months. Brookfield is advantaged because and Radiant, because we have this big bank of powered land that we can draw from, which allows us to accelerate our timelines. But if you don't have that, it can take you 24 to 36 months to kind of build that trust. And that, by the way, every single one of those days, you're burning cash, and you're burning a lot of cash in these businesses.
So when you're a 1 month old startup backed by this large $100 billion fund, just for AI infrastructure, I should say, because Brookfield is over $1 trillion in total. So you've got this big backer, but you're only a month old. These projects, even on an accelerated time frame that Radiant can deliver, take 12 to 18 months. How do you start to build trust early on?
Yeah. So I think there's two things. One is we have what was the Ori cloud is now the Radiant cloud. So we can build that each and every day. And that comes across in uptime, in things like GPU efficiency and utilization, things that you can measure and put out there. Those are mission critical to the overall trust building exercise. The other part is that you do want to be able to attract the right customers. So putting in place customers that will automatically convey that credibility with you is important. And so we're looking to make some of those announcements here in the coming months that can really underpin the fact that, hey, if they trust, and they're the smartest guys in the room, if they trust Radiant, that's a huge marker in their favor.
And then I guess the onus is on Radiant to deliver, because otherwise you become one of those announcements that never deliver.
Exactly. And execution's no small task in these businesses. They're incredibly complex. If you think about all of the things that go into building an AI factory, there is power, right? There's power distribution, there's cooling, there's the GPUs themselves, there is the network infrastructure that's associated with it, and then the software that not only keeps them running, but then the application stack that sits above that. And so all of these things have remarkable complexity. And so, again, the ability to draw upon an existing successful NeoCloud, gives confidence. And again, you're talking about this across, we're speaking about AI infrastructure, but this, in a lot of the space of AI, it's easy to make these promises because the buying audience isn't particularly sophisticated as to what you're trying to do and what you're saying and the difference between truth and fiction. And so proving is a huge piece of this.
I just had a laugh when you said between truth and fiction, thinking about model hallucinations.
Exactly.
One of the things that we talked about prior to going live here is that even though these are long projects, the decision time frame can be very fast. So how does that play out in the go-to-market techniques and programs that you run when people are making fast decisions on long projects? That's a fairly unique combination there.
Yes, and it's unique, and it's defined really by the world in which we live in, which is that we don't know what the world is going to look like in 18 months, but you know that you need to make a decision now in order to put yourself in line to be built so that you can have optionality in 18 months. And so every month that you delay is a month that you're not going to get back on the back end, and you don't know who's going to get in front of you, both from a GPU allocation perspective or from a memory allocation perspective, because, if they jump you in line, that may push you out 2 months or 3 months, even though you've only delayed your decision by 1 month. It's not a linear push. In the old world, just talk about CRM for a second. If you chose not to adopt a CRM and you kept everything in spreadsheets, you know what your cost is, and you know what the risks associated with forestalling that decision are. You don't know what the cost of forestalling a decision in AI will be. And so there is this extraordinary pressure to make good decisions quickly. But it really goes back to that concept of really slowing down your thinking, but speeding up your decision making. And that's the world in which we live in when it comes to AI infrastructure.
Slowing down your thinking, but accelerating your decision making. Talk more about that.
Yeah. So, this is a concept Daniel Kahneman's put out. It's in his book, and it's well known, but you really want to think deeply about the problem. And you can do that, don't context switch, spend time focusing on the problem that you're trying to solve, eliminate the distractions, but then commit to that decision and move forward with it, because the decision importance has never been higher. it is very hard to swap out a vendor once they started building, right? You can swap them out before they started building. If you see something, you've lost time, but you haven't lost time and money. And so I think that, these decisions are really important. But if you just slow down and think, right, what is it that I'm trying to solve for? What are my goals? And then you can sort of find and distill down who are the best partners to help me deliver that. Because at the end of the day, um, I came from the storage business, right? At MinIO, and we built a great business there. And at the end of the day, there's probably 10, 11, 12 premier players in the storage space. There's another 30 or so that I would call more niche players. I'm not saying they're not legitimate. They're just more niche in their and limited in their capability set. I think what you'll find in the AI infrastructure space is that you're probably going to have kind of mid-single digits of, legitimate players, and then another, 10, 15, 20 max of more niche players. And so trying to find the right balance there around who can deliver for you is going to be really important. Right now, there's, I think, 130 neoclouds that get tracked by the semi-analysis folks. There will not be 130 neoclouds, in 2 years' time. And that doesn't mean that you can't add GPU stock to your existing, data centers, but that doesn't necessarily make you a neocloud. And so there are very different kind of definitions there.
So, how does a marketer help a prospect think deep and decide fast?
So I think the key to start with is that you're leading that decision, right? They're coming to you because these are very complex problems, as we've talked about. And so you're leading this. Now, the key is to listen carefully as to what they're solving for, right? And be able to give them solutions back that make sense for them, both in terms of timeline, in terms of budget, in terms of end customers that they're seeking. But it is really about crafting that message, because it's not a one size fits all message. One country may be looking to protect their national heritage. Another country may be looking to protect their national security. Those are two very, very different use cases. And one would say, I have to be in country. I have to have a sovereign energy system. I need to have a sovereign, non-dependent control plane. Whereas somebody else might say, I'm very comfortable having this run out of country using data that may reside in country. And so there's a variety of contexts that you can, and a continuum there, but you have to be a good listener, but then you have to lead that decision, because they can't make the decision quickly if they don't sort of feel like they're in the right place. And again, that's just confidence building.
So, how do you operationalize good listening at scale?
In our case, the scale is different. We talk about scale in terms of the size of the infrastructure project, but the scale in terms of the audience is limited. And by that, I mean that you can count the number of true hyperscalers on two hands. You can count the number of countries that are looking to actually activate an AI, sovereign AI initiative. It's 30 to 40.
Less than 100, probably.
Yeah, it's less than 100. Now, it should be on every country's mind, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they have the capacity to go execute on that. And we're focused on those who can go execute on that. The challenge of doing it at scale is not as significant as it's been in other businesses that I've been the CMO of, but it is one where you just have to bring expertise to the table, and you either have I wouldn't say you either have the empathy gene or you don't, but you do need to make sure that you're building a team that has that capacity. And a lot of the team from Ori had that capacity. That's why the business was successful. And certainly that is the case with the team from Brookfield that's come over as well. They've got a lot of expertise here. They're not talking at the customer. They're talking to the customer and conversing with the customer. And again, that conversation is what builds great relationships, but it also builds successful projects. And I think that's something that's really important.
So, I think maybe one of my last questions is, from someone who's come from a more traditional B2B marketing background where you were selling to thousands and thousands of customers, right? Even larger storage projects. And I know you've only been at this for a month, so this might not be a fair question, but any revelations? Oh, this is the same, or oh, this is different, that can guide our audience that might sit on either side of that spectrum.
So much to my pleasure, brand has made a big comeback in the last really 12 months. And I think that's a function of the fact that at the end of the day, a brand is a promise. It's a promise of what you're going to bring to the table and what you're going to deliver. And so building a brand that you can be proud of, that you can stand behind, that represents what you can actually deliver
That's
is
trusting.
and trust, right? Is
Yeah,
incredibly important. And so, I think that that is a continuing thread, whether you're selling software, whether you're selling factories, gigafactories, whether you're selling, consumer software or consumer products, the brand piece is really important. And I think that's, been a unique experience in my career thus far, is that, we got to build Radiant from scratch, right? I got to build MinIO from kind of a GitHub repository forward, but the name was already there. Like, we came up with the name, we came up with the messaging, we came up with everything from scratch in about 6 weeks. And that was an incredibly enjoyable process, exhausting, but also incredibly rewarding, particularly as you push that brand out into the world and you see it get embraced and people say, golly, that feels like industrial grade AI, because that's exactly what we were trying for.
that's awesome. Well, I think, speaking for myself, I'm going to watch the brand because I think there's going to be great things in store for that. Let me finish this up. We always like to ask people at the end. This has been a great conversation. Super much enjoyed it. If you had to leave the audience with one or two key takeaways, what would those be?
So I'd say one thing is that I have found that every new job that I have taken has pushed me and stretched me and made me a better marketer. And I would not have been able to do at MinIO if I hadn't been at IOSD, and I wouldn't have been able to do what I did at IOSD if I hadn't been at Ace Metrics. And I certainly would not have been able to do what we did at Ori and Radiant had I not been at MinIO. So I think each one of these allows you to take another step up that ladder. That's not saying you should change jobs every 2 years, because that has its own downside. But I do think that, new jobs, whether you take it at the same company or elsewhere, they're going to push and stretch you. And I think that change is really important. It makes you just a much more effective marketer, gives you more tools in your toolkit. So I think that's one of the key things. And I think, in a world where AI can generate so much content and can stress attention in the ways that we talked about, being authentic in that brand and being authentic in that messaging is probably the most important thing that you can do as a marketer these days. The tooling and the capabilities to do outreach at scale, they're almost like weapons of mass destruction as well, because if you do it wrong or you do it ineffectively, you're just, you know, pushing out so much slop. And I think, again, being thoughtful about the things that you're doing, and there is, to some extent, there is a more is less message to be found in that, because again, we're trying to create connection. And whether you're doing that for an audience that's as fairly narrow as the one we're dealing with, or you're doing one that's much, much broader, you're still that authenticity and that, that trust that you build in the brand. It comes from making good decisions. And I think that can be often undermined by the habit trail of, oh, I need to get more leads. I need to get more leads. I need to get more form fills. If those form fills aren't the right people, you're burning cycles. And so constantly asking yourself, are we being efficient in this? And efficiency comes back to trust, and trust comes back to product marketing and messaging.
Yeah, to me, it's trusted connections around the brand. And I think you've said it well. So thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. And, we'll look forward in a year or two having you back a third time to hear about all the great success at Radiant.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you, Jonathan. Bye-bye.